Too hot for TV.
Welcome back to Doctor Who Too Hot for TV. We're the podcast that looks at all things Doctor Who Extended Universe. Today, I am joined by Gareth Preston, who's no stranger to this podcast. Welcome, Gareth.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's delighted to be here again.
It's wonderful to have you back. You were the first ever guest, and then you were with John Isles. Probably about 18 months ago, something like that, a year ago. It feels like it was yesterday, but, time has a habit of getting away from us.
Absolutely. In the week where it's been 20 years since Rose was on, and it's like all these nostalgic articles, and, I'm old enough to remember the other 20th anniversary, so like back in 83.
Well, we're going to delve even further back than that today. So why don't you tell everybody the two things you've picked to talk about?
Well, today we're looking into two unmade stories, two lost stories. We're taking a look at Farewell, Great Macedon by Moris Farhi and The Queen of Time by Brian Hayles.
Two very interesting lost stories. One may be a gem, one not so much, but I'm sure we'll get into that as we go. But the first one we're going to do is Farewell, Great Macedon, which was written by Moris Farhi, as you said, and adapted by Nigel Robinson for Big Finish. It was directed by Lisa Bowerman, and it was produced by David Richardson. It was released on the 10th of November 2010 and recorded on the 25th, 26th, 27th and 28th of January 2010. News at the time: Doctor Who was going to film in America for the first time ever for the season 6 opener, and the Doctor Who Experience had just been announced. So this was right at the beginning of Matt Smith's tenure of the Doctor. He'd had one season. It's an era I look back on quite fondly, because I feel like that was the period where the cancellation and anxiety started to disappear, because it's like we're on our third Doctor. It had survived David Tennant being massive and was still going strong. So for me, at that point, I was like, perhaps I stopped worrying that perhaps the next season would be the last season.
Yes, it was a nice time to feel part of this unusual feeling of being a fan of a global phenomena, a proper global phenomena, sort of.
Indeed.
And it was very exciting to think we were going over to the glamour of America to do some filming back then.
It was an exciting time indeed.
I mean, it's interesting. This is the point where Stephen Moffat said, let's stop pretending that nobody's heard of Doctor Who.
Yeah. He was like, people will come back every week and watch it, so we can afford to do a bit more of an arc-based story. That season has its fans and its detractors. I'm a big fan of that season. I look back on it very fondly.
I have mixed feelings, but generally, when I say mixed feelings, there's nothing I hate. It's just maybe that arc could have had a better resolution to it. I feel
indeed.
It's easy to lay the clues. The success is how you link them together.
Other merch at the time from Big Finish, we had Bernie Summerfield Year Zero, A Town Called Fortune, which is a companion chronicle featuring the Sixth Doctor and Evelyn, Graceless, The Resurrection of Mars featuring the Eighth Doctor and Lucy, and Lurkers at Sunlight Edge featuring the Seventh Doctor, Ace and Hex. On DVD, we had the Sarah Jane Adventures, the complete third series, and Doctor Who, the complete fifth series. If you were In arenas around the UK, you could find Doctor Who Live, The Monsters Are Coming. From BBC Audio, we had Demon Quest, A Shard of Ice, and on television, there was Sarah Jane Series 4 being broadcast, with the comic strip being The Golden Ones featuring the 11th Doctor and Amy. So plenty of merch. Anything stick out there?
Good memories of the Resurrection of Mars, I think. I mean, I must admit, a lot of that I'm afraid I've not encountered yet, but Resurrection of Mars is a great little Ice Warrior story, and I like the conflict it builds up between the Doctor and his new companion, that they really end up on different sides of this, and that whole about sacrificing one for the many or not.
That entire run of 8th Doctor stories that were sort of also on the radio were a real favourite of mine. I was also a big fan of the Graceless spin-off, although I've not been back to it since I first heard it, so I cannot comment on whether I still think it's a release of quality or not. But maybe one day I'll get to it on this.
I can't. Well, I did try this because I think they played that on the radio as well. I think that was on Radio 4 Extra, and I did try listening to it, but there you are. I don't think I was very well at the time. I've got a memory of kind of lying in the bath, sort of like listening and thinking, this is just not engaging me, this. But maybe I need to listen to it under more ideal conditions.
Indeed. Well, one day I'll get to it on this and decide, revisit it and see whether it's as good as I remember it. I think for me it was the first sort of original drama Big Finish did that I really engaged with, and maybe it was just the sort of storytelling that I liked at the time. But if you ask me what happened in it, I couldn't tell you. So there we go.
Too hot for TV.
The TARDIS lands in the Hanging Garden of Babylon, where the first Doctor, Ian, Barbara and Susan become entangled in court intrigue at the height of Alexander the Great's empire. As they meet Alexander and his closest allies, they witness both the grandeur and internal tensions of his reign. A conspiracy led by the bitter Antipater and his allies seeks to destroy Alexander's vision of unity by assassinating his inner circle. One by one, his inner circle fall, each death shrouded in deceit and ultimately blamed on the travellers, although the Doctor and Ian prove their innocence through trials of fire and combat. The damage is done. Alexander himself is poisoned by Antipater during a final banquet. The Doctor tries to save him, but when Barbara reveals that history has destined Alexander to die, the king, his dream unfulfilled and his friends gone, chooses death with dignity. As chaos erupts among the generals, the travellers escape in the TARDIS, but not before witnessing Alexander's funeral pyre bidding farewell to one of history's greatest dreamers.
Too hot for TV.
A farewell, great Macedon. Did you hear this when it came out?
I don't think I bought it exactly when it went out, but I think I'd heard good things about it, and so I think I listened to it about 6 or 8 months after its release. I got a good memory of I was driving down to see my sister, and basically I listened to the first 3 episodes on the way down and listened to the other 4 to 6 on the way back home. And so I do have this memory of sort of driving through the night and having this story going on in my mind.
Yeah, it's one that I know I've heard it before, and I don't remember thinking anything particularly fondly of it. Like, not disliking it, but not particularly liking it. But I am a sucker for a Hartnell historical, so this time round, I was a lot more engaged with it and had a much better time. I imagine, you like you say, you've got to sort of be in the right mood, and maybe I was, on a commute somewhere or in the bath or ill or, anything, and it just for some reason didn't float my boat the first time round. But it's one that I've wanted to revisit for ages, as I say, because I just love a Hartnell historical, so this should be right up my street. And, turns out it is. Moris Farhi. It's not a name I'm familiar with. Do you know anything about Moris at all?
I hadn't heard about him until I was doing one of my own podcasts. I was looking at Out of the Unknown, the TV series, and he wrote an episode for that. For the 4th season, he wrote an episode called Welcome Home. which starred Anthony Ainley as this.
Oh, of course. And I was on that podcast.
You were there, yes. And about this man who comes home and finds another man saying, "No, I'm the real Anthony Ainley." Sorry, I can't think of his actual name. And it was quite decently written. And in the course of doing that review and doing the research, so I found out a bit more. And he's very well thought of. He's quite a literary author. In fact, I find it's quite interesting. He's one of those people who covers both high and low culture. He's well regarded for his plays and his his writing, and he's also was quite involved in Amnesty, but also as an actor, he starred in a whole lot of films, including 2 James Bond films. And he'd written for a whole load of very popular mainstream shows, like the Eden Line, for example. And Doctor Who comes right at the kind of the beginning of his TV writing career.
Yeah, because he's got, like, looking at his credits, he's got, like, a few things of, like, Compact and Man in a Suitcase, Strange Report, Out of the Unknown, as you say, The Saint. So it's kind of weird that his path didn't cross with Doctor Who, that he didn't end up on a Doctor Who at some point.
It is. I mean, some lost stories, and we might cover this, never really get beyond that initial pitch, and with what makes Farewell Great Macedon so interesting is it's one of those, it nearly got there, and it's fully written, and we might get into the business of why it was fully written a little later on. And for a while it was sort of on the radar, and if politics at the time had been a little bit different, that's politics with a small p, to be honest, had been a little bit different, we might well have been talking about it, as it might have been in that sort of Reign of Terror slot.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do we think of this script? Because there's a lot of the time, as you say, a lost story can be lost for a reason, because maybe they're too big of an idea, maybe they're just not strong enough. But, like, I come to this and I'm like, this is a solid Hartnell historical. So, does it work for you in terms of how it handles the TARDIS team and the world it creates and all of that?
I think it does really well. I've really grown to love the Hartnell historicals. The last time I did a marathon, the full marathon of Doctor Who, it was the Hartnell historicals really jumped out at me, and so I thought, wow, these, especially in the first season, I'm afraid to say, they are definitely better written and richer than the science fiction stories around them. In fact, Reign of Terror is now, it's one of my favourites. Hartnell's.
I love Reign of Terror. I think it's brilliant.
I think it's absolutely. That one's really grown on me, and I wasn't that keen on it when I was watching it in a scratchy 4th generation copy. But now, especially since the DVD, and I can appreciate it properly as a story. What a great story! And I've got similar feelings because this really feels authentic. It feels like a decent, solid Hartnell historical that treats history with respect. It's got that, all the TARDIS team all have this kind of sense of awe that they're here and they're part of this, so there's this moment in history. It's well researched. They do speak in that kind of mock Shakespearean kind of language, but it works brilliantly here, the same way it does in The Crusade and Marco Polo. That slightly theatrical way of courtly way of talking works really well, and there's lots I like about it. I've got a few caveats on it, but generally I think it's a really gripping, interesting story, and it actually, I found it quite a little moving, even towards the end.
It's quite touching. It's got some great cliffhangers, very 60s cliffhangers of, it's all political intrigue and assassination attempts and things like that. And so the danger feels more visceral and real in a way, because you believe that they're living in a highly cultured, but at the same time a highly barbaric's the wrong word. A society that isn't afraid to use violence and regularly solves things with violence. So the danger feels, somewhat more real, which I guess is what I like about the Hartnell historicals, especially. Like in the Crusade, they're not there having, like, they do have some fun with it, especially all the stuff in the court. But ultimately, they've landed there, they've got involved in local politics, and they just want to escape. They're not on about, it's not even about changing history or fighting off aliens or being involved in anything. They just want to get back to the TARDIS and disappear. And there's a bit of that same sort of feeling here, that they've just wrapped up in these amazing events that, as you say, they're all in awe of. But at the same time, like, they know that if they stay there, they're bound to die one way or another.
Absolutely. I think that's something I do like about the Hartnell historicals. They've all got that sense of danger to them. I mean, people talk about the Romans being a comedy. It's a flipping violent story, the Romans.
Bad things happen in the Romans. It's presented in a comedic way, but it's still quite a vicious world they're in.
Yes. And this is very much, Farewell, Great Macedon is very much in that tradition.
We're not the first people to say that the BBC do historicals better than they do the sci-fi ones, but you can just imagine this script being brought to life with, I think of Marco Polo, I think of the Aztecs, things like that, where it's like, there are some big moments, and you think, how would they have done that on the BBC budget? And the answer is with a painted backdrop and this, that, and that, the other. But I think all the other sets would have looked amazing, and I think you would have had some amazing actors of the time show up and play these parts and give real meaty performances. So it's like, I can visualize what it would look like had it been made in the 60s, and like it's a crying shame this one wasn't made.
Absolutely. And I know what you mean. I absolutely can see this one in my head when I listen to it and what it would have looked like. Alexander's camp, that would have been a painted backdrop. And there's quite a lot of tents used in this one, so there's quite a lot handy. I can imagine tents being redressed from episode to episode for different people. And in fact, in the very good script book that was released by those marvelous people at the Nothing at the End of the Lane publications, and they published a script book, and they've done some kind of made up telesnaps to go with it.
Do you know what? I've got the book behind me and I didn't look at it. What a fool I am.
It's a beautiful piece of work they've done on that, and they all look absolutely authentic. And you were saying about the cliffhangers. I could really picture those cliffhangers, ending on Ian's worried face as he's facing a spear, and you could see the little caption coming up next week. So I was like,
you said that you had a couple of minor issues with the script. What were they?
I think my biggest issue is, and this is a problem with some historicals, is that the Doctor and his friends are largely passive through most of this. Most of the time, they're just kind of witnesses to what's going on. There's a lot of scenes, they're a bit like sort of embedded reporters who've been given complete access by Alexander to kind of just go and interview everybody. So we get these, in one way, beautifully done conversations between the characters and these historical people. We were just saying about they're usually in danger and trying to get back to the TARDIS as soon as they're not so much in danger. Even though the TARDIS is disabled for most of the story, it never seems to be too much of an issue or a worry for them. It's just kind of just slowly recharging in the background for most of the story. So that is the biggest problem, that yes, they're quite passive. It takes a long while for them to really get into taking an active part in the story.
I mean, I think because this is so early on in the history of the show, and we're still in that, the historicals should really educate. That when you say it does feel a bit like they're interviewing the local people, you kind of think this is the author trying to fulfill that remit in the way that he knows how. I do think there's some interesting stuff in terms of, let's take the Aztecs, for instance. It's all about you can't change history, not one line, and the Doctor is very much going at loggerheads with Barbara over it. In this one, he seems a little more okay with with changing history, especially when he's talking about saving people's lives. And like, you can see, again, I imagine if it had got made, they would have ironed that out within the ethos of the show. But although they do mention you can't change history, he seems like he'd be absolutely fine to to save Alexander and change history.
He does seem that way, but then this is a Doctor who's not quite the Time Lord that we know. One of the things I quite like that Big Finish did with this and the Masters of Luxor and the complete fragile yellow arc of fragrance is that they're almost like this little mini series of parallel where the pilot episode is where they begin. And because the sense that the Doctor and the Susan, they are human time travelers from the distant future rather than aliens. Yeah. There's that line early on, Susan says, why, even in the 51st century, we've heard of you, Alexander. So there's that sense that the Doctor, he's a little bit more fallible. And that he's, which I quite like. I don't like the Doctor to be a bit too all-knowing. I quite like the delightful bit where he sees the priest Iolus doing this sacrifice, and he's all like, "Oh, he's cooking that beast all wrong," and starts trying to show him the right way to do it. I quite like that he's at this point a Doctor who makes those kind of mistakes.
And it's that thing that, although they weren't necessarily thinking of this in the show at the time, retrospectively, you can look back and go, the Doctor's a young man in this, and new to time travel, and behind the scenes, they haven't quite thought up what... The Doctor isn't a hero at this point. Like, heroic things happen, but I don't think... for me, it's the Daleks' invasion of Earth where he's the first time he sort of turns around and goes, we're going to stop the Daleks because they're evil, essentially. Whereas before that, he's just a traveller, sometimes having a good time, sometimes having a bad time, and being a bit cheeky and slightly meddling, but not too much until then. But it's interesting, as you say, with the three that you mentioned, to sort of see, because these were never made and probably needed another draft, there are things in there that, paths not trodden, shall we say.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the other thing. I think there's a general roughness to the script that it's just, it just needs another draft. It just needs a little bit of tightening up to make in fact, it's interesting in his memories, in the interview that's in the script book, Moris Farhi did say that they did talk a little bit about introducing some servant characters whose fates are obviously a bit more up for grabs, and sort of having the Doctor and his companions interacting with them. But by that time, ultimately, the ship had sailed on that one particularly. I mean, another way they could have done it is that in a way that the Doctor knows that he's kind of just busy work in a way. He's doing it to kind of placate his companions in a way, sort of like, but even though he knows it won't work ultimately, that might have been something they might have, or having Ian and Barbara kind of realizing this and saying, you're just sort of indulging us, aren't you, Doctor?
How do you think this works as a production? So the approach the Big Finish take, it's sort of somewhere between a dramatic reading and a performance. You have William Russell and Carol Ann Ford reading in most of the parts, with John Dorney playing Alexander, and then bits of music and sound effects and things like that. How does this approach work?
I think it works really well on this one. I never found it confusing who was speaking. I mean, both William Russell and Carol Ann Ford, apart from their own parts, but they seem to swap everybody else around, and it's a case of whoever's reading that scene does the impersonations. Yeah. I think Carol Ann Ford actually does a quite decent Jacqueline Hill voice. Yeah. I could really hear her voice.
I've been a little unkind to Carol Ann Ford on a few podcasts, especially when doing Shakedown. But I was actually quite impressed with sort of the the number of different voices and characters she could do in this, and just to differentiate them enough from her own voice to make them all stand out. So, I think she does a great job, and I've always liked William Russell's impression of the First Doctor too.
Yes, I think he captures. Well, it's not an You were just saying this actually on the podcast I was listening to. It's not an impersonation; it's a performance. just to steal somebody else's quote there. And they both do a really good job. I think it's the best thing Carol Ann Ford has probably done. Now, I've not heard everything she's done for Big Finish. I can't talk about Susan's War, but it's really good. It's surprising to find out I think this is the longest Big Finish release, actually.
Yeah, because it's about 3 hours and 40 minutes, something like that. But I think it's quite a meaty script, and I do think it's important with these lost stories that they are presented as, if the scripts exist, especially, as accurately as you can possibly, even if the scripts don't make sense, even if the scripts are terrible. It's not Big Finish's job to fix these. You want to sort of get it as close to where it would have been made for television. Sort of thinking back as to why this didn't perhaps work for me first time round, I used to struggle I do occasionally still struggle with audiobooks, and with this leaning more towards an audiobook, I wonder if that's why I didn't engage with it. But through this podcast and exposure to these things, I've just ended up, I can now get my head around audiobooks a lot more, and I just think I have to be in a mood to focus on them more in a way that I don't with a straight audio play, because there's always sort of different things going on with it and different voices to sort of keep me engaged, whereas sometimes with audiobooks I find myself drifting away from them. So maybe that's what it was first time round. But I have to say, I do think this approach works really well. I mean, part of me would love to see them have another stab at it with the Bradley Doctor or something like that, but they won't. But I think I just think this is a great adaptation, given the resources they had, and they weren't doing recasting at the time. It was not their policy. So I think this is a great way to tackle these 60s stories.
I think it does work, this kind of audiobook style. It lends itself particularly to the 60s stories, I think. This is one of the few stories that you could actually do a full production of, because we have a whole script. And but it doesn't need one. I think this is a perfectly decent adaptation, this. I think it's one of Lisa Bowerman's really good directing jobs. So it's funny, I've met Lisa Bowerman several times, but not since I've listened to Farewell Great Macedon, which is frustrating, because I would like to, tell her next time. I always think, next time I see her, I must tell her how much I loved Farewell Great Macedon, and it's not happened yet.
Quite rightly so. I think she does a fantastic job of, again, making the soundscape of it interesting with, the sound designer and the music, and the performances. I think it's very well done. And I think John Dorney as well, being cast as Alexander, he gives a great performance that's sort of pitched at a 60s level of television / theatrical, but it's not a send-up in that respect. Like he's taking it very seriously. It's not a performance you'd necessarily see on television today, but John Dorney's been in enough Big Finishes to know that he's got a great range in that respect, and I think he does a really good job as the sort of, the only guest part.
He does actually. I agree. He actually sounds like a 60s guest star in this. You could imagine him in this. Speaking about Alexander's one of these historical, like a lot of the really big historical figures. There's lots of different ways you can take him. And all through the centuries, every major empire has tried to claim him for their own, basically, and take different aspects of him. And Moris Farhi has a very 60s, quite a benign take on him. It's all about brotherhood. It's all Alexander. He was bringing all these different cultures together, and that's this. He's not a hippie, but he's got these kind of 60s values. The Summer of Love is a little bit farther away at this point, but
Yeah.
it's that kind of optimistic 60s vibe. He's a great man. He's just a pity he's got poor impulse control. But I think a lot of historians might take issue with this fairly positive view of Alexander. That this is a man responsible for all kinds of terrible war crimes and massacres and stuff in his career. And he wasn't really a state builder. He was great at conquering places, but not so good at kind of running them. And the fact, his empire splits into 4 pieces as soon as he's dead. Any historical point, you have to, in a way, you have to kind of choose your angle, really, in history, and say, because you can't, if you try and cover everybody's point of view, you just end up with a mishmash. So I like it in a way that this is Moris Farhi's, this is his passionate view. And apparently I'm not a great historian. I've done a little bit of reading up for this podcast, and apparently there are historical things like all those generals weren't apparently actually there when Alexander when Alexander died, for example. But I can appreciate that it's much more satisfying for a story.
Absolutely, to get the drama out of the situation. I also think it's so long ago, you can pick and choose a little bit more what elements you can present him as a hero or a villain, and it's sort of fine. It's when you get into more recent history and you don't address the more complicated parts of any great leader's personality and their story that I think perhaps sometimes can be a little bit problematic. But also, it's a piece of drama, so if we take Victory of the Daleks, it doesn't have time to explore the history of a very complicated man. If anything, Churchill is almost the comedy sidekick who's, he's a caricature of himself. So, and I'm sure you could do a fantastic story that looks at the complicated version of Churchill, but that's not what was required for it. And I think they do a good enough job here of going, this man conquered and killed, but he is a sympathetic character ultimately.
Yes, absolutely. He must have been incredibly charismatic, in his life, and like you say, it's that far away. It's separating the fact from the fiction. Where it's legends, things like the Gordian knot and that sort of thing. Were they true or was it propaganda? We can't really tell.
Absolutely. So, why didn't this story happen?
According to the sort of production notes, going back to the script book again, sort of what happened is that David Whittaker had arranged for Moris Farhi to write episode 1. With I believe a fee of £50, sort of like as an encouragement. There's an interesting bit in one of the letters where he says, you're far too good a writer for me. I'm not going to ask you to write work for nothing because you're worth more than that. But Moris Farhi is absolutely passionate about this story, and he says, do you mind if I actually write all 6 episodes? Because I love the story and I want to write it. And I've got lots of free time at the moment. So he does all 6 episodes. Takes it in. David Whittaker reads it and says, this is very good. Unfortunately, the production office had been getting some flack from teachers because of Marco Polo, which was on at this time. And teachers were complaining that their children were including the Doctor and his companions in their history essays about Marco Polo.
So you can't win.
You just can't. So a little moratorium. So David Whittaker says, okay, we're not going to feature any famous historical characters now because of this. So unfortunately, Alexander the Great, it's not going to work. And like I said, they briefly talked about, could we do something with like Alexander in the background, but still set there, But
that's not really true, though, is it? Because they immediately... I mean, I guess the Aztecs there's no famous historical characters in it. But then by the time we get to the Reign of Terror and the Crusade, and, they're all full of very famous historical figures, from Napoleon and Robespierre to Nero and things like that. So it's obviously a policy they only kept going for a very short amount of time, I guess.
Obviously, and it's just unfortunate for Moris that at that moment he just had the right script at the wrong moment.
Yeah,
you could
it's
say.
Sad. But so do we? It was due to sort of be in the Reign of Terror slot. Is that what you were saying?
I don't know if I'd be that specific, but certainly it's there amongst a list of possible stories on some of the documentation, and I think it was seriously considered by David Whittaker. So, like I said, it came very close. And what he did do was send the script around the BBC to other drama editors and say, here's this guy, he's a really good writer, this is an example of his work. And that did get him, work on Compact and other shows. So it was not in vain. I believe he did later try and rewrite it as like a Sunday classic style period adventure, without the Doctor involved. But he was told, no, we own the Sunday classics is for established books adaptations rather than historical, just kind of period adventures.
It's such a shame. I would have loved it if this even had materialised as just a straight drama at some point, like a 6-part series on Alexander the Great, because it's just so down my street in terms of Doctor Who, or indeed vintage television in general. It's such a shame that it wasn't made, and it really is like the dialogue in it sparkles in the way that things in the Crusade and stuff like that, where you go, someone's really trying to make a good piece of drama and not talking down to the kids.
It does. It takes it very seriously, and I love this kind of historical. One of the things I like about Chris Chibnall's time is that he did kind of try and bring the historical back. You get
the feeling that with those that somebody somewhere higher up went, there's got to be some sort of sci-fi element, because they are the weakest things about things like Demons of the Punjab and Rosa. It's like, I could have just done with this with being a straight historical. And it's also, in that era, it's great to see the historical sort of landscape done so well.
Absolutely. And it has an interesting, sorry, this is a little bit of a tangent, but with Chris Chibnall's, it's like, is that whereas RTD very much goes for, it's the celebrity historical. It's well-known people, because that gets bums on seats because they want to see. Whereas Chibnall, I think, did see that this was an opportunity to introduce an audience to bits of history that they might not know about.
Absolutely. And even like, I knew very little about Alexander the Great going into this. Like, I'm sure we covered bits of it at school, but it's gone from my mind. So if we're talking about the show's original intent, it was still educating me at 41 years old. So, it's...
like you, I've learned quite a bit.
Have you listened to the Fragile Yellow Arc of Fragrance at all?
I have. I had listened to that afterwards. That was basically a straight spec script. Right. He kind of just sent to David Whittaker to say, hey, do you remember me? And your producer. I'm sure he was a little bit more eloquent than that, but it's not nearly as good. I think it's lovely written. It's nicely poetic dialogue. I mean, just that title, the Fragile Yellow Arc of Fragrance.
Yeah.
But it's much more of a Star Trek script.
Interesting.
Even though Star Trek is a few years ahead, it's that kind of, here's a beautiful civilization where everyone's incredibly intelligent, sophisticated, but they have one really stupid law, and which inevitably Captain Kirk or a crew member falls foul of. In this case, in the case of this civilization, is that you're only allowed to fall in love once. You see, only once.
That is very much a Star Trek story, it feels like.
Very much so. And so what happens is, one of the locals falls in love with Barbara, and but she does not return his feelings. And then but then his sisters try and hijack the TARDIS to sort of force the matter.
I must listen to it at some point. I think I've heard it again, but the first time around I heard this, but it just didn't sit in there. It's interesting. Both the title of that and this are not what you would call typical Doctor Who titles.
They're not
from the era, and I think it's interesting that he, again, we talked about his language and his dialogue and stuff like that. There is a sort of poetry or prosaic nature to the titles, and I would love them if they were a little bit. There were stories like that.
I miss those. I mean, it's easy to laugh. There's a Babylon 5, which is a show I love, but it does have some very pompous episode titles, I must say, and similarly Andromeda, which I'm not a fan of, but this one, I mean, all the I'm just looking now at the list of the individual story titles. So we had The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, The Wrath of the Greatest Grecian of Them All, or
brilliant,
A Man Must Die, The World Lies Dead at Your Feet. This one's a bit Terry Nation, In the Arena. And then Farewell, Great Macedon.
Again, they're not your average individual episode titles either, and I think it would have been lovely to see a writer like this get his teeth into that early Doctor Who. Not that I would change any of the other historicals particularly. It's a bit of a lost tragedy for me. Interesting to note that he also pitched something called The Divided for the Graham Williams era, but the script is long lost, unfortunately.
Long lost. It seems like he couldn't remember what it was about himself, so we'll never know.
It said he was commissioned to write the teleplay, so, I mean, it's very sad that is nowhere to be found.
Yeah, because I'm sure it would have been an interesting read, at the very least.
Do you have much more you want to say on Farewell, Great Macedon?
I think I've covered most of it. I was going to say, it is quite a violent. Listening to it, sometimes I thought, wow, that's quite violent, as people get variously impaled and stabbed and poisoned, and a funeral. There's 2 funeral pyres in this. But then I think about Reign of Terror, which, if you look at it on paper, and the Aztecs, both.
If they were in this situation, we'd be saying the same about it. Going, I'm not sure they get away with the violence, but it was a more theatrical sort of violence, though. In those early historicals, you definitely wouldn't do it now.
More that, and I think I was saying about caveats. Another one possibly is that Ian's prowess as it slightly stretched my credulity that this school teacher is able to defeat every battle-hardened Greek soldier, sort of like in Alexander's army at wrestling.
I mean, we should say there is that fantastic sort of competition towards the end. They're put on trial essentially, and they each have to have a little challenge. And like Ian wrestling, as you say, is a stretch too far, but I do like that the Doctor basically has to walk over coals barefooted, and he just gets his feet really sweaty so that it absorbs the moisture.
That's the scene I would again. I'd love to have seen that. You can just imagine Hartnell doing that and doing. I'll walk back now, shall I?
Absolutely, and there's also there is a moment where the Doctor talks about being a medical student, I think, which is just again something lost long to time for the character.
And also he seems to believe in heaven as well. Yeah. There's an interesting bit near the start where he sort of says that if we have not arrived in heaven, it is only because I do not know the way yet. But
it's just a path not trodden for the show so early on. And again, maybe those things would have been, he would have been told to take them out at some point. So if you've got nothing else to say, we must rate it. Is it a clanger, a banger, or an average meander?
Oh, this one, definitely, it's a banger.
It's a banger for me too. Thank you so much for nominating it, because it is an absolute slither of 60s Doctor Who that takes me back to the type of Doctor Who I really love from the 60s, so it was an absolute pleasure.
I can only echo your words there.
Excellent.
Too hot for TV.
So the next release we're looking at is The Queen of Time. It was written by Brian Hayles and adapted by Catherine Harvey. It was directed by Lisa Bauman, produced by David Richardson, and was released on the 29th of October 2013 and recorded on the 5th and 6th of March 2012 at the Moat Studios. So, news at the time, Doctor Who had won the Best Drama and Outstanding Achievement Award at the TV Choice Awards, and even more exciting than that, The Enemy of the World and The Web of Fear had been announced as being returned to the BBC archives.
Oh, jaw-dropping.
I know. I'm still waiting for the iTunes ready Marco Polo. It was a fantastic time, and hopefully one day we'll get a slither of something else somewhere.
I'm keeping my finger. I feel there's one more episode.
I feel there's a couple of things. All the work that Film is Fabulous are doing at the moment in cataloguing collections, and it feels like, I mean, as they've said themselves, a lot of those collectors are getting on a bit and will not be around forever. So anybody that's got a collection that can be saved, we might find the odd little gem in someone's collection, but I do think we're probably heading towards a point in the next 10 years where if we don't find it, we're never finding it.
We are reaching just the physical condition of the film. And there's plenty of other things I wish they would find. I mentioned Out of the Unknown. I would love them to find some more Out of the Unknown as well. And in a way, I've noticed it's almost become a meme now. The flipping Doctor Who fans, they're all...
Doctor Who and Dad's Army, isn't it?
Yeah.
Those are the ones that they get asked the most. But Out of the Unknown, some of the missing Callans, some missing Avengers. Anything that's genre, I'm immediately interested in. Fingers crossed we might see something. Other releases at the time, so from Audio Go and Big Finish, we had the 10th Doctor and Donna Destiny of the Doctor's story, Death's Deal. Then Audio Go also released Doctor Who at the BBC, Lost Treasures, and 50 Years of Doctor Who at the BBC box set. On iTunes, we had the aforementioned Enemy and Web. Then we had on DVD the 10th Planet and the complete Series 7. From BBC Books, we had Summer Falls and Other Stories, and from Puffin Books, we had The Mystery of the Haunted Cottage, while from Big Finish, we had The Ghost in the Machine, which is a companion chronicle featuring the Third Doctor and Joe, the 5th series of Gallifrey, 1963, The Space Race, and The Light at the End, while the comic strip was The Tickletown. Well, we were right on the cusp of the 50th anniversary. The show felt unstoppable.
At this point, yeah, absolutely. Great time to be around. Is that Space Race the 1960? Yeah, it would have been part of the 1963 trilogy.
Yeah.
I really liked the Space Race. I thought that was a really good idea, that of Laker, the Russian space dog, comes back to Earth and he's talking. And I think that's such a delightful idea, and it builds it. Yeah. That would be my pick out of that bunch.
I am taken back to that midnight drop of Enemy and Web of Fear, staying up very, very late to try and get through.
I had a couple of friends round the next day to have a watch of Enemy of the World.
Amazing.
Too hot for TV.
While piloting the TARDIS, the second Doctor and his companions, Jamie and Zoe, are interrupted by a cackling woman on the view screen, Hecuba, the sinister Queen of Time. Transported to a surreal realm of sand-filled corridors and ticking clocks, they soon discovered Hecuba forces visitors to play deadly time-based games, turning losers into clocks. Zoe and Jamie face deadly traps, including the Grand Chronometer and an aging time disc puzzle, while the Doctor is lured into a series of challenges involving history, all while Hecuba flirtatiously taunts him. When Zoe and Jamie are nearly killed in a giant hourglass and trapped in shifting illusions, they use logic to survive, eventually aiding the Doctor's escape from a time booth. Hecuba, intending to destroy the TARDIS and freeze the trio forever, is outsmarted when the TARDIS jams her clock mechanism, freezing her instead. The Doctor, Jamie and Zoe flee Hecuba's realm as it collapses, revealing her to be the sister of the celestial toymaker, forever trapped in her own crumbling world, vowing revenge as time itself turns against her.
Too hot for TV.
So the Queen of Time, when did you first come to this release?
Yeah, last year I went through a bit of a Lost Stories phase. I'd built up a whole load that I'd never listened to, just keep buying them in those sales. So yeah, I listened to it kind of as part of a whole season of Lost Stories.
And where do you stand on Brian Hayles' Doctor Who work, and indeed any other work that you may have experienced?
Generally with Brian Hayles, I think he's great at doing action-adventure stories. I think that's his strength. And unfortunately, whenever he kind of goes outside of that and does something a bit more quirky, quirk does not suit Brian Hayles, I'm afraid. He hasn't really got a feel for it, I'm afraid. And it's interesting, I was aware of the Queen of Time because I'd bought, going back to the splendid Nothing at the End of the Lane range, I'd been buying their fanzine, which has a nice article on all the unmade Brian Hayles scripts that they found. Basically, found a bundle somewhere. And this was one of them. And we were saying there are some stories where it's obvious why they weren't made for reasons of ambition. Ambition is one of the reasons, but the most reason this was unmade it is appalling.
Yes, it is, to start with. It is just a retread of the Celestial Toymaker. Again, something that for many years was thought to be a lost classic by people who saw it when they were 7 years old. But as we learned more about it, we realised perhaps it wasn't that. And, the story still got its fans. I think I read the target book of the Celestial Toymaker as a kid, and that left quite an impression. But then the target book is more atmospheric than the existing episode and the audio we've got, I think.
Definitely. It's a very... similar to you, yeah, I'd heard about this story. It's nightmarish children's toys coming alive, but no, it's very tedious. And Queen of Time repeats all the same faults of the Celestial Toymaker and adds a few more for good measure.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's basically the same story. It is a series of sort of tasks that relate to time rather than games. I think the conceit of the Queen of Time, while I don't think it's done well here, I think there is an interesting story to be told with the elements of it. But it's not this. It's not this script.
No. Yeah, there is something potentially interesting about some sort of god of time. Or godless, but this is a very poor implementation of that idea, I'm afraid.
So, what is it about it that doesn't work for you?
Oh, so much. Well, let's start off. Yes, repetition. Just as Celestial Toymaker has those, it's full of people explaining the rules of the game to each other, and they keep explaining the rules of the game to each other. That happens here. Jamie and Zoe and Hecuba and the Doctor, they're all just kind of repeating and narrating on what's going on all the time. Something happens, and then Jamie tells Zoe what's just happened, and then back at base, the Doctor and Hecuba, they've been watching it, and they tell each other what's just happened as well.
Yeah.
So that is dreadful for a start. Hecuba is a terrible one-note character. There's just nothing to her, especially once you've seen The Devil's Cord, which has a superficially similar character to that in Maestro. But Maestro's interesting, and she's got a really weird godlike plan that motivates you. Hecuba is just this kind of spoiled rich woman who fancies the Doctor. She's just so childish and
but it's also the way she fancies the Doctor is like we did The Prison in Space. Now, I'm not saying that either of these that story was better than this in any way, shape or form, but the the character fancying the Doctor, while ridiculous, was played for laughs. Here, it's sort of played quite seriously, and I know it's difficult. We're judging it based on the audio version, but it's written quite seriously, and there's not really anything made of that. It's just she's almost just a bit lusty and weird. It's a very odd sort of sexual attraction to have in Doctor Who, I think.
It is very odd, even with Patrick Troughton. I mean, now we kind of know Patrick Troughton. Oh, he was very charming with the ladies, but watching it as a kid, he's an old man practically, sort of like, and so just having this endless, and he's so passive as well. That's another thing. He barely gets involved in the story at all. You'd think he was going on holiday, or maybe and this isn't the case of he's fallen ill, so we'll have to write him out of this story. This is the beginning. This is the story being designed, and the Doctor has nothing to do except sit there. And there's no wit in his exchanges with Hecuba. She just kind of says these one-note flirty phrases, and the Doctor just goes, no, thank you, please, it just drags every episode. I was like, I was looking at my watch or looking at the little progress bar thinking, I can't believe this episode. We're still only halfway through.
The problem with the lack of the Doctor's involvement or the Doctor's involvement in this is that the story isn't clever enough to warrant it having a character like the Doctor in it, because he would solve everything immediately, if that makes sense. So they have to sort of sideline the Doctor and let the companions deal with the threats, because the Doctor would immediately know how to solve all these threats. So it's almost like the story doesn't work for Doctor Who in that respect.
No, absolutely. If this is the criticism that's often put to companion. In fact, stepping back to Farewell Great Macedon, I was slightly reminded, Terence Dix, in one of his interviews, said that one of the problems with people writing for Doctor Who is that they come up with a world and it's full of characters, and then they think, well, where does the Doctor kind of insert into this? Where can I stick the Doctor into this story? And that's definitely a case to some extent with both of these stories. But there's no real challenge. I mean, she's the Queen of Time, and there's no real time paradoxes or anything of that level. It's just
she just sort of ages people, de-ages people, things like that, slows them down, speeds them up, that sort of thing. That's
it. A little bit of time travel, putting them into different places. If anything, she should be called the Queen of Clocks. If anything, it's more a clock-based world than a time-based world.
Yeah. There's the interesting, semi-interesting moment where they are put into like different wars, and she's like, I'll use a tank, and then the Doctor defeats her with peace and all this stuff. And while that's not very interesting, you do wonder whether Terence Dix or somebody logged that idea and went, that became the genesis of the war game somewhere, like a few weeks later, because we're in that sort of period where war games is coming up.
It's possible, or possibly Mind Robber, which has that kind of battle in it with fictional characters. And although and then you think, how would that have been resolved? Or it would have just been Fraser and actually it was written, I ought to say, it was written when Victoria was still the companion. So the synopsis is Jamie and Victoria, but obviously we're talking about the Big Finish version, so it's Jamie and Zoe instead.
Oh, interesting. So had Deborah Watling passed away? She hadn't passed away at this point, right?
I don't think she had, but they've never really got her back to play Victoria. It's interesting.
No, she shows up in another Lost Story, doesn't she? She shows up in the one where the Sixth Doctor meets her or something.
Oh, I'm afraid you've found a hole there in my in my knowledge. I wasn't aware that she'd actually ever played her own character again.
Yeah, but it's an older version. But I don't know why you wouldn't use Victoria at this point, and I guess we'll never know. Because I just assumed that even if it had started with Victoria, that it had sort of come over to season 6, and been redeveloped with Wendy Padbury. But
yeah, I think Catherine Harvey had to do a little bit of rewriting just to make it a bit more Zoe. So it's Zoe who does a lot of the working out of games. Unfortunately, this makes Jamie even thicker than normal. And that's annoying because he isn't thick, but for some reason writers, and seems to be a theme in all these lost stories, just write Jamie as this idiot, basically. Yeah. I mean, at the opening, when they received this clearly sinister message on the TARDIS monitor, sort of like, "Oh, come and join me, Doctor," and Jamie goes, "Oh, I don't know what you're all worried about. It's just a bit of tea with a wee lassie."
Yeah, like he hasn't been through so many adventures to know that these things always end badly.
Absolutely. And something else I don't like about it is that he uses superlatives a lot, and which I was taught, avoid superlatives. Never say something is the most. But here we go. Yeah. It's the most beautiful woman they've ever seen. And flashing. If you ever listen to this, do not do a drinking game where you have a drink every time Hecuba's eyes flash or are flashing, because you will be paralytic by about halfway through. I don't know why. It's just like I'm exaggerating. It's not every scene, but it feels like every scene. Hecuba's eyes flash with irritation. They flash with danger.
It's a very basic script. There's no real characterization. Everybody's the most base level version of themselves. I find the Big Finish production of it an interesting one because it probably gives it a lot more atmosphere than it would have had in the 60s to a certain. Like, I think Lisa Bowerman's going, "God, this is so bad. We need to amp things." So there's the sound design I think really works, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily sympathetic to the era, and they're doing the best with the narration to sort of the slightly more grotesque moments, like the creatures, I forget what they are, and, the carcasses of animals stuffed into each other and stuff. They almost sell that better on audio than they would have done on TV, because it just feels like they're trying to give this turkey of a story sort of appeal.
I would, yes. I think production-wise, they're really doing a good job of making bricks without straw on this one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, there were other scenes where I thought, how on earth were they going to realise? Whereas Great Macedon, you can see exactly what it would have looked like. This one, I was thinking, how are they going to get this? There's like a giant fountain that turns into a staircase, I think, at one point. Or this room with a huge sweeping clock hands, and the Jamie and Zoe have to keep jumping over this huge sweeping. I mean, if they tried that, it would have looked, I think, pretty terrible.
Again, if they'd latched on to the idea, I think we would have had serious rewrites to make it work. And you kind of wonder, even with Celestial Toymaker, whether there was an earlier version that had much bigger, more exciting ideas, and they just went, "We can't do this on this budget," so they strip it back, and that's why you end up. Well, that's not why, but it's part of the reason you end up with such a bland, inconsequential script.
I can believe that, yeah. So, no, we can't manage a void here. Here's a few painted backdrops with swirly bits on them.
Yeah. It's like, because you kind of wonder, you mentioned the Mind Robber earlier, which has, some of the same elements and stuff, but it's very much written with the ability of the television production team in mind. Like, essentially, you're meeting some historical characters, some fantastical characters that are like, well, they're clockwork robots, and there's the white void and things like that. Although we think of it as sort of ambitious, you could still read it and go, if it was just a script, and go, I can see this working in a 1960s television studio, whereas here I'm going, some of these ideas they would struggle to do now.
Yeah, absolutely. That bit I was saying where the Jamie and Zoe are sent back in time to terrible battlefields, that would have been just them with some ropey back projection going on in there. Yeah, whereas Mind Robber really makes a virtue. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the Mind Robber, and I one of the things I like about it is the creative use of black backdrops to create this little world. It's and very framing the camera, very tightly, so that you just see. They're very good at giving an impression. Early 60s Avengers are very good at this as well, of creating a bigger world just by focusing. We're in a prison because we see things through some bars and that kind of sleight of hand.
But I don't know how that you would do that with this, because they're very much ideas that need to be seen on the screen.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Hecuba's two helpers, Snap and Dragon. Oh dear, that's terrible. Again, he can't do Quirk really, and you just know that would have been just two guys. It would have been Bok basically, two guys in body stockings with a mask, basically.
But then, a season later, you've got the Seeds of Death, which I love because, as you say, he can do the action, he can do the straightforward science fiction, and do it really well. It's a cracking six-parter, and later you've got the Peladon scripts, can do action and sort of the political side of things, and you go, oh, okay, so this stuff really works, but it's his Toymaker and his Queen of Time that just don't quite hit the nail on the head.
Just really let it out. And I'm quite a fan of Warlords of Atlantis, which he wrote. Again, it's that kind of action adventure.
What, is that a series?
So there was a film called Warlords of Atlantis, which I can fully recommend. Well, it was produced by the same people who did the Land I was about to call it The Land Before Time, but that's a cartoon, who did The Land That Time Forgot. It's
amazing. Might have to check that out.
It's worth checking out because it does actually feel a bit like a Doctor Who story where the Doctor, we've got Peter Gilmore as an eccentric scientist instead.
Amazing. Okay, I'll give that a look. How do we feel about? I mentioned a bit about sort of the atmosphere, and then perhaps having to beef this up. But generally, as a production and the performances of Fraser Hines, Wendy Padbury, Lisa Bowman's direction, stuff like that. How are we feeling this as an adaptation?
They're doing the best. Like I said, time was hanging heavy on my hands listening to this. So on that level, they're afraid not lifted it up, I'm afraid. But again, I don't think they've got much to work with there, and I don't want to criticise Caroline Faber, much as Hecuba, because she's got nothing to work with here.
They're all doing the best they can, but I think everybody goes into this knowing it's a turkey. I don't think it's Big Finish's job to try and turn it into gold. I think it's Big Finish's job to go, this script doesn't work, and this is why ultimately it didn't get made. I
think that is its role. It's to present us as they could have been, rather than do a big script editing job. Yeah, you're quite right. We want to hear the authenticness, and this is authentically awful.
Because as I said, there's a seed of a good idea in there, and somebody at Big Finish could have taken it and turned it into something really amazing and interesting and clever, but then it wouldn't be The Lost Story. It would be something else featuring this same character.
Absolutely. So in some ways it was remade better as The Devil's Chord, if you want
Absolutely, yeah. So do we know ultimately why it was rejected? Was it just the quality of it?
I have a feeling, rather like Terence Dix said to Terry Nation after he'd read his latest Dalek script, "You've sold us this one before." In his little review part in Nothing at the End of the Lane, Toby Haydock said that it was rejected amidst accusations of repetition by Peter Bryant.
I can absolutely see that. It makes perfect sense, and I think while there is a version of this that works, I think you're putting too much effort into rewriting it.
Yeah.
Actually, the idea isn't strong enough to warrant doing that. And it is almost beat for beat the same story. So it just doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. So it was wise to put this one in the bottom drawer and write Seeds of Death instead.
Exactly, but I'm very thankful for Big Finish for bringing it to life, just so you could hear how dreadful it was in the first place. Do you have anything else to say on The Queen of Time?
I think I would be in danger of repetition myself. I think at this point, no, it's a real troll and a drag to listen to. I will, however, share this little bit because I think it sort of sums it up. In his notes, in his background to the story that accompanied his pitch, Brian Hayles said, Hecuba likes to be thought of as with it and scientific, but has the typical woman's approach to science. It's all magic, really.
Jesus. Well, there you go. That explains a lot.
Yes.
We must rate this, and I think we're going to rate it based on the story. Like, I don't think either of us are particularly critical of Big Finish's approach or Big Finish's production values or even the performances within it. Like, so I think we should rate it on the quality of the story, of whether it's a clanger, a banger, or an average meander.
Yeah, absolutely. And rating it as a story, it's a clanger. So,
it's a clanger from me too.
So, in fact, I'll raise a glass to the people who did their best on this doomed mission.
All I can say is I'm glad it was only 4 episodes, although it did feel like 10 at certain points.
Too hot for TV.
It was really enjoyable to visit the two ends of the spectrum of the Lost Stories, and also, like, having done a couple of other ones recently that are more towards the clanger end of things. Farewell Macedon was a really nice one to visit, and is particularly in one of my favourite eras of the show. But why don't you sort of sum up sort of like your overall feelings on the Lost Stories range? Because you said you've done a bit of a binge of them recently.
I'm a big fan of the Lost Stories. In fact, I was quite amazed to hear on one of your, I think it was the podcast where you were covering Prison Space, that Jason Haig-Ellery at all needed some convincing, because to me this is exactly what Big Finish should be doing, finding these lost stories, because I don't know what it is about science fiction fans, but we are fascinated with things that didn't happen. We're always I don't know why we have a particular fascination with the roads not taken, and we love our working titles and our earlier drafts. And in fact, I've got a book, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, called The Greatest Science Fiction Movies Never Made.
Oh, wow.
And
let's check that out.
Well worth checking out. There's some fascinating, but I don't think you'd never get a book, The Greatest Westerns Never Made. We do like these coulda beens.
It's odd, isn't it? I don't know, fans of other things, like, that go, like, do football fans go, oh, well, they were supposed to play this person if they won, and, like, no one's interested in what that match would have looked like. There's like an archival nature to science fiction fans, Doctor Who fans, that is like, I need to know everything that could have happened as well as what happened.
It's a bit like that. I mean, I think film fans have it a little bit. There's that thing where you hear that so-and-so could have been cast. We could have had Dustin Hoffman as Superman in the 70s. Yeah. Heaven knows what that would have looked like. It's hard to imagine a beefed up Dustin Hoffman, really, in that costume. Yeah. But, so I'm a big fan of the Lost Stories. Most of them, I tend to listen to them and think, I can see why this wasn't made. Usually it's just lacking that certain something, but sometimes you come across a real gem, like Farewell Great Macedon. I'm a big fan of The Foe from the Future. I think that's
great.
That's an absolutely rattling good story, that one.
The Elite is another favourite of mine I really enjoyed.
Leviathan, I was a big fan of that. I thought that was a really good story. Sometimes I suspect that one might have been slightly rewritten. It has a bit of a New Who, somehow a feel to it.
Yeah.
But it's still a great story. Well, that's for the Sixth Doctor, for anybody who doesn't know. Paradise 5 is another one I really liked. I thought that had a really good idea to it.
Yeah.
Sort of a bit Lovecraftian in space.
Yeah, I look forward to sort of catching up with some of the newer ones. I really must give Operation Werewolf a listen at some point. They've done that recently. And Death World, which was the original 3 Doctors. The first Lost story I properly remember becoming aware of after the season 22 ones was The Master of Luxor. And I read the script book as a kid, but I don't think I've ever listened to the audio, so I must do that at some point.
Definitely. Yeah, I think because it's very much a companion piece to Farewell, Great Macedon. Like I said, it seems to be part of this slightly parallel season where the Doctor's a bit more religious. I mean, that's the really interesting thing about Masters of Luxor. It has this religiosity running through it that you never had really in the series.
Yeah, very interesting. But again, early days for the show, so the characters weren't quite as defined. Well, look, Gareth, thank you so much for coming to chat to me today. Got anything you would like to plug?
Well, I'm still producing Very British Futures, the podcast about British science fiction television. We're going into a bit of an 80s phase soon with Play for Tomorrow, which is a very obscure... I must admit, I'm going very obscure for a while. Just Play for Tomorrow... Play for Tomorrow, and then Codename Icarus, which is a teenager... sort of, 80s teenagers just discovering computers for the first time. So that should be brilliant. And you said I'm about, I never take it for granted being a guest on this show. It is always a pleasure, and thank you very much for inviting me and having me on.
Wonderful. We'll definitely have you back again in the future. Maybe we'll do the Masters of Luxor. Next time, once again, I'll be joined by Joe Ford, and we'll be taking a further dip into the world of The Stranger with The Stranger's audio outings, including the 2 Stranger Chronicle audios from BBV, some short stories that were exclusively released on the DVD releases, and the brand new Stranger audiobook, The Stranger, Stranger in a Strange Land. That's a lot of strangers. But until next time, I've been Dylan.
I've been Gareth.
And this has been Doctor Who, Too Hot for TV.
Too hot for TV.